gonna make a video about boundaries. It's such an important topic and it's such a feel like misunderstood topic. I want to jump right in. So there's a big problem in relationships that causes a lot of damage in the way that we relate to one another. And this can be with friendships, it can be between children, at work environment, romantic environment. And I feel like if we break it down, we can see where the issue lies. And I want to propose to you to break it down super simple. I love breaking things down simply because if we complicate things, well, that means, number one, we don't really understand it. And then also we get overwhelmed. So I want to start the subject of boundaries by first focusing on awareness. Everything starts with awareness, consciousness. Because if you don't really understand what's happening, if you don't really know what the experience is informing you, you're going to action based on maybe a misconception or false belief, and basically it's going to be a reaction. And reactions oftentimes are not really based in reality 100%. Anytime that you find yourself triggered in one way or another, so some sort of an activation inside of you, usually there's an 80% likelihood that that's a historical experience, something that happened in the past that hasn't been processed yet, it hasn't been resolved within you, within your system. And then 20% is actually what's going on. And then we take that 20% saturated with our past experiences that are mostly unconscious, and then we react and then perpetuate similar experiences from before that just reaffirms the false belief. So when it comes to boundaries, boundaries are learned early in life and through the experience people in our life. And if you think about it, our early childhood experiences, the main ones, the ones that really inform us about the world, they happen between the ages of 0, meaning the time that you start to experience the world by kind of diving into the pool of reality of our physical environment. That happens without your consciousness. That happens even before birth. So there was a study that showed that people, for example, during World War II or after World War II, when there was famine and there was a lot of stress and there was so much pain, that the children that were born in those environments or were gestated during those environments really impacted their life. So that shows that it's not just the timer doesn't start when you're born. The timer starts when you're conceived. And you start to absorb all of these experiences and without any consciousness, without really understanding what's going on. So if your environment doesn't feel safe, if there's things going on with parents, all of those experiences, emotions, they are being absorbed by this fetus that hasn't been born yet, right? So I say that the experiences start before you understand what they really mean. And then what we do is we absorb those experiences, especially through the first 7 years of our life. And then through that phase of our life, we place beliefs based on those experiences on a very, very narrow degree of understanding of a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old or even before you were even born, right? So you can't really expect that limited conscious being to really deeply understand what's going on, to understand that, parents are going through a hard time or maybe that you're absorbing some false experiences that your parents are having, right? Some fears that they have, that they are living in their 80%. Anyway, so when it comes to boundaries, it's important to understand that your experience of boundaries comes from a time of really, really low consciousness. And so the first thing to do when it comes to boundaries is awareness. And I'm gonna teach you guys a little bit about how to get into this relationship with this part of yourself. So boundaries really are non-existent for a child when they're super young. Boundaries start to develop with the individuation process, which is when the child starts to understand that they are separate from their parents, that the world does not revolve around them, that they have their own will, right? They start to engage in their will, meaning that they have choices, decisions, right? So they choose which shirt to put on or which shoes to put on or which hand do they eat with, or, wanting closeness or wanting to push away closeness. And it's in those experiences that really educate us about boundaries. And a lot of it has to do with the consciousness of our environment and our caregivers. And so when you experience your relationship with boundaries, a lot of the time it has to do with your early experiences of those being respected or being conscious in your upbringing. So your body is going to be a really important tool in this process, because your body is going to either contract or relax and expand depending on your experience. Because even though that the mind or the consciousness may be limited in that time, it doesn't mean that your body is going to be confused. Your body may not have the understanding, but it does have a response. And so when your body is telling you that something energetically doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel comfortable, and you may not know why, but that doesn't mean that it's not real. And our job as adults, as developing humans with aspiration to be more conscious and to be more grounded in reality and engage the world in a more conscious way, it's our responsibility to start to become curious, start to become more in tune with what are those experiences, what are those messages that come from the body. And then through our conscious curiosity and education and actions, we will then upgrade, align with what those physical experiences are with what is necessary to bring your life experience into balance. And so I'll give you an example that, let's say a child grows up with a parent that, culturally is very enmeshed. So, for example, very much involved in the choices that the child is making. So telling the child everything about how they should be. To some degree, that's very necessary because of the responsibility the parents have towards the safety of the child, right? And also creating a container, a safety container for the benefit of the child. And that, for the child, even though it might be uncomfortable, but the child can also feel that there's consciousness and love behind those actions. So for example, not crossing the street by themselves at a young age. So the parent may restrict the child doing things on their own very early in life, and that's a very healthy boundary. And even though the child might not like that, because the child wants to explore and wants to fight for its independence, the child can also feel the love and care behind those boundaries. But on the other hand, let's say when a parent is invasive and enmeshing, for example, forcing the child to eat when the child is no longer hungry, or forcing the child to give a relative a hug when a child doesn't feel the desire to do so. And all of these things oftentimes are really not for the child, but for the parents. And those are the moments where the boundaries for the child becomes confusing, right? Their body's saying no, but their caregiver is telling them to do something that they themselves are not wanting to do. And it's not for their protection, it's not for their care, it's for some alternate reasons. And so then what happens is that now there's certain injection of certain feelings that start to go into the child. For example, if the parent puts this pressure on the child to do certain things, they might also shame the child, saying like, well, you be a good girl or a good boy and do this thing. Don't you love mommy? Don't you love daddy? They might say, you hurt me by not doing something. You are careless or thoughtless. And so then the child starts to absorb those beliefs and experiences. And then what happens is now there's a conflict inside the child. So on one hand, the child feels, no, I don't want that. I don't want that to do those actions. And then on the other hand, if I don't do those actions, I feel really bad. I feel really crappy about myself. I feel I'm a bad kid. And then also, I feel that if I don't do it, I lose connection. And so then what happens is because the child cannot assert for themselves, what they do is they find different ways. So they distance, they get quiet, they hide, or they get really aggressive, depending on the child's personality. And it turns into these toxic behaviors of oftentimes manipulation, oftentimes self-attack, all those types of things. And then the boundaries get portrayed as something negative. You start to feel bad for saying no. You start to feel guilty, or you start to feel like you don't have the right to honor those feelings of no inside of you feel within your body. And then what happens is we associate boundaries with something negative. So when I say no, I lose connection. And so then we think that, well, boundaries means losing connection. And what we do is we override this system of our truth, of our feelings. We don't communicate them. We don't speak up for ourselves, and then we build that resentment inside, and that resentment inside is what actually creates separation. So the first thing I want to tell you guys is that the belief that boundaries create separation is actually a false belief, because boundaries are actually meant to create more connection. It's to create better communication. And of course it is possible to lose a relationship when you exercise your boundaries. What actually would happen in that scenario is that there was not a lot of relationship to begin with. So you're not actually losing the relationship. You're just experiencing the pain of separation from that person. But if you focus on valuing the relationship more than just proximity or the interaction with the person at a great cost to your own well-being, that's actually going to cause a lot more pain for you, and also a lot more pain for those that you interact with. And so when you really understand that boundaries are actually meant to improve relationships, improve connection, closeness. And to do that, I want to invite you to start with a very simple process of awareness. And that process is intrinsically embedded already in your system. So it's not something you have to search. It's something that you have to tune into, kind of like a radio station, an awareness. And your body is simply going to tell you when something feels good and when something feels bad, right? Because that part of your system is really operated from that place of a child. So, for example, that I gave earlier, like go hug Aunt Sally or whatever, and that's your body saying like, no, I don't want to. That doesn't feel good. And then you ask yourself a question like, by me honoring this experience inside of myself, my body is saying no. By me honoring the voice, the feeling that's coming from inside of myself, am I actually hurting someone? And sure, Aunt Sally might feel rejected, right? She might feel, that unloved or whatever it is. But at the same time, you have to understand that we are not responsible for the interpretation of our actions with other people. So, for example, if a child doesn't want to hug their aunt and the aunt feels rejected, is that really the responsibility of the child? And then how does that translate into our adult life? Well, if you go out on a date and somebody wants to kiss you or wants to hug you, and you have this belief that you have to please the other person and you are responsible for their feelings of rejection, what you're going to do is you're going to override that feeling inside of you that says like, no, I don't actually feel that way. And what you're going to do is you're going to override that and actually do the thing that the other person wants you to do, to try to avoid that negative experience, that negative response. But if you think about that, if you, as an example, hug this person that you really don't feel like hugging, you're actually not being honest with them. You're actually sending a mixed message, where inside of you want to create distance, but outside you're communicating you want closeness. And then you find yourself in a pickle, where now there's an expectation of this person of being closer to you than you are ready for. Well, you can also communicate as an adult in a kind way, so you don't have to be an asshole about it, but boundaries also don't have to be mean, right? Because think about the thing that I mentioned earlier, boundaries are there to create connection. So for example, if you are on a date with someone and they want closeness, but you're not ready for it, if you can inform them where you're at, now they're more in connection with you. Now there's a curiosity like, oh, are we not compatible? Is there something that I'm doing that's impacting this person's desire to kind of hold that space? It can turn into discussion, or it can just be a clarity that maybe this is not the right person for you. And then that would save you so much heartache and save them so much heartache. And even if at the moment it stings a bit and you feel a bit like an asshole, and they feel a bit rejected. That's really important. Those feelings are super important, because as you're allowing yourself to be in your truth and knowing that you are actually being kind in the process by being honest, some of those old experiences, those 80%, starts to burn off. It becomes easier for you to share your truth and share those boundaries. So to start with, I want to invite you to start to pay attention to your body. And it can be very simple. You can start by simply practice with choosing an outfit in the morning, right? You put on a shirt, you look in the mirror, you feel what it feels like in your body. Does your body feel relaxed? Does you feel pleasure in your body? Does your body experience lightness, right? Do you feel that there's a tightness in your body? Do you feel that it's harder to breathe? Right? That's information. So that's by doing that, you're tuning into this internal mechanism of your body that will tell you exactly what is a yes and what is a no. And by learning to tune into the yeses and the nos, these yeses and nos will inform you before your conscious mind will figure it out. So the moment that you are going to have the impulse to hug the person you're on a date with, there's going to be a moment in your body that's going to say, wait a second, is that really what you want to do? And you can just take a pause, right? Take a pause, take a breath, and just kind of hang out with that feeling. Hang out with that feeling that says, there's something important for me here. And it's okay to say, I need a minute, I need a moment, and really honor what that information is giving you, that from your body. Yeah. The more you practice, the more trust is developed between you and you. That really deep inner part of you that really knows what's good for you. And the adult, ego side that is listening, that is paying attention and honoring. And really, this is something that naturally develops when parents actually have this mechanism in place within themselves. You see, so when a parent is really in tune with their own boundaries, they will pick up on those subtle contractions in their child, and they're like, hey, do you want to hug Aunt Betty or Aunt Lily or whatever? And they can feel the contraction, right? It becomes and then when they see that the child's contraction happens, they kind of help the child develop that muscle that says, oh, you don't have to do the things you don't want to do when it comes to those types of experiences in your life. And then creating a discernment between when you are leaning into discomfort with purpose, meaning that if I'm an introvert and I tend to hide from connection because, I have some fears about it and I want to challenge that, I'm challenging it with purpose. I'm challenging it consciously. And so then, even though my body is contracted, I can be in a relationship with my body. So I can take a breath, I can hang out with it, and then I can have that yes inside of me to do something that is still challenging, but it's because of my choice. So I'm not overriding those deep intrinsic systems inside of myself. I am not betraying myself. And in that way, you are going to have a much safer experience, because you're going to know when things don't feel right. You're going to pick up on those subtle cues, and you're going to align your actions with those cues. And then also you're going to be able to challenge yourself to step into those spaces of discomfort when you understand the purpose behind those actions. And you're going to do it in alignment of your yeses and your nos. So I hope you found this video informative, helpful, and please leave if you decide to engage, because engaging really helps you in this process. Share maybe examples in your life when you were a child where you were forced to betray your boundaries in one way or another. And again, we're not trying to shame or blame our caregivers. We only receive, people can only give us what they themselves have. And unfortunately, in today's world, we are still very unconscious beings. We're on our way, but there's still a lot of work to do. So I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you in my next video.